Good morning. Welcome to the Rector's Forum in the Church. This morning we have with us just a great hero of mine. The Church has spent many years catching up to Matthew Fox. When his seminal works, Original Blessing and The Coming of the Cosmic Christ, were published, they were greeted in some circles with shock, scandal, and a lot of talk of the end of Christianity. Today, his spirituality based in ancient Judeo-Christian tradition, supported by leading-edge science, bearing witness for social, environmental, and gender justice, is flourishing in the creative and prophetic spirit of our times. Matthew Fox is an internationally acclaimed spiritual theologian, Episcopal priest, and activist who is a member of the Dominican Order for 34 years. He holds a doctorate, summa cum laude, in the history and theology of spirituality from the Institut Catholique de Paris, and has devoted 45 years to developing and teaching the tradition of creation spirituality. Matthew has reinvented forms of education and worship and awakened millions to the much-neglected, earth-based mystical tradition of the West, revivifying awareness of Hildegard of Bingen, Meister Eckhart, Thomas Aquinas, and Thomas Merton, among other pre-modern and postmodern spiritual pioneers. He has authored more than 35 books on spirituality and contemporary culture. We have his two latest books are available outside. There's a book table on the lawn. He has a new book about Thomas Merton called A Way to God, Thomas Merton's Creation Spirituality Journey, and this beautiful book of the Stations of the Cosmic Christ with photographs of the various stations you'll find in our north transepts here, and a beautiful commentary. He wrote this book with Bishop Mark Andrus of Grace Cathedral. And we have many other classic titles for sale out there also. Seeking to establish a new pedagogy for learning spirituality, melding the ancient Western tradition with contemporary scientists and modern mystics, Fox founded the Institute in Culture and Creation Spirituality that operated for 7 years at Mundelein College in Chicago and 12 years at Holy Names College in Oakland. For 10 of those years at Holy Names College, Cardinal Ratzinger, you may remember him, tried to shut the program down. As chief inquisitor and head of the Congregation of Doctrine and Faith, Ratzinger silenced Matthew Fox for 1 year in 1989 and forced him to step down as director. 3 years later, he was expelled from the order, thus terminating the program at Holy Names College. Fox went on to establish the University of Creation Spirituality in Oakland, where it thrived for 9 years. He has taught at Stanford University, Vancouver School of Theology, Association for Transpersonal Psychology, California Institute of Integral Studies, the Findhorn Foundation, and the Omega Institute, among many other places. He's currently collaborating with a group of creation spirituality leaders, his former students, to establish the new Fox Institute of Creation Spirituality. In a conscious effort to reinvigorate Western ritual, Matthew has deconstructed forms of worship inherited from the modern era and reconstructed these forms by going back to the pre-modern practice of dance. The result, called the Cosmic Mass, mixes dance, techno, and live music, DJs, VJs, rap, and contemporary art forms with the Western liturgical tradition and continues to be celebrated throughout the United States. Most recently, Matthew Fox and Bishop Mark Andrus have collaborated to create these Stations of the Cosmic Christ, an updated approach to the traditional Stations of the Cross, replacing the fall redemption perspective with a cosmology that transcends doctrinal differences. We are so honored to be hosting this art installation here at All Saints for the next 6 weeks, again in our north and south transepts. Matthew Fox is a recipient of the Abbey Courage of Conscience Peace Award, and his work has been honored by theologians, artists, healers, and thought leaders around the world. Matthew is joined this morning by Ulrich Javier Lemus, the gifted San Francisco artist who created much of the beautiful work you can see in our transepts. Please join me in welcoming our great friends, Matthew Fox and Javier Lemus.
Good morning. Thank you, Christina, and thank you for inviting us to display these Stations of the Cosmic Christ. It's a practice that we hope will spread around the world, just like the Labyrinth practice did. I'm very pleased to be here with the artist. I just call him Javier, who was born in El Salvador, has been living in San Francisco since his young 20s. And M.C. Richards, who is now deceased, also created the I Am tablets that are part of the 16 stations. So we'll be talking about these stations shortly, but I've been asked to speak just a little bit first about Thomas Merton. How many of you know Thomas Merton? Wonderful, wonderful. Well, just briefly, I had a certain relationship with him because when I was a young Dominican, I was allowed to go get a doctorate in spirituality, and we couldn't agree on where to go. So I wrote Merton and said, where should I go? He said, go to Paris, to the Institut Catholique in Paris, which is where I ended up, thanks to Merton, and where I met my mentor, Père Chenou, a wonderful French Dominican, who named the creation spiritual tradition for me. And so I can truthfully say that all the trouble I've gotten in since I owe to Thomas Merton. Because if I hadn't met Chenou and learned about creation spirituality, well, I would have been just one more boring theologian. So, so last year was the 100th anniversary of Merton's birth. I was invited to speak at the Thomas Merton Center on Merton and myself, and I inserted another name, Meister Eckhart, because Eckhart converted Thomas Merton. In his first early writings, Merton was very dualistic, very full of guilt and shame. But in 1958, after 18 years in the monastery, he flipped. And what flipped him? He met the great Buddhist scholar from Japan, Suzuki, who told him to read Eckhart, your one Zen thinker of the West. And so Merton started doing that in depth in 1958, and it flipped him. He changed from being this dualistic, Augustinian, fall redemption theologian to being a prophetic Christian. The last 10 years of his life were spent either dealing with interfaith. He did books on Buddhism and Taoism and Native American spirituality and so forth, or dealing with social justice issues. He was the first religious figure in America to come out against the Vietnam War. He backed Rachel Carson. As soon as her book came out, Silent Spring, considered the launching of the ecological movement. She had just been fired by her science department for the book. They said, this is an hysterical woman. She's in love with trees and bunnies. And he wrote her a 3-page letter and said, thank you so much. Because of your science, we are ceasing to use DDT on the monastery farm. Your science, your story explains to me why there's so few birds left on the land here and so forth. So he was immediately on it with all kinds of cultural issues in the 60s. I also have proof now that he was murdered by the CIA. He died suddenly in 1968 after giving a talk to monks and nuns in Bangkok on, quote, Karl Marx and monasticism, unquote. Not the most prudent title for a talk in Southeast Asia in 1968. But he died a martyr for peace, and that should not be swept under the rug. Of course, that was the same year that King was killed and Robert Kennedy was killed. But I'd like to just share with you a few of his poems, because let him speak for himself. He's just an amazing spokesperson for wisdom and humor and challenging us. Here's one poem called First Lesson About Man. Man begins in zoology. Now that, I think, is this affirmation of evolution. Man begins in zoology. He is the saddest animal. He drives a big red car called anxiety. Whenever he goes to the phone to call Joy, he gets the wrong number. Therefore, he likes weapons. And he knows all guns by their right names. He drives a big black Cadillac called Death. Now he is putting anxiety into space. He flies his worries all around Venus, but it does him no good. Man is the saddest animal. He begins in zoology and gets lost in his own bad news. To me, that's vintage Merton. It's fun, it's humorous, his images are readily available and they're deep, and the whole thing is substantive. He's raising all kinds of questions we don't have time to go into right now. But to me, that is pure Merton. Another poem that I love very much is a poem about prayer, about singing the Psalms. You know, as a monk, they get up in the middle of the night, the Trappist monks, to sing the Psalms. And so he writes this short poem about the Psalms. When Psalms surprise me with their music, and antiphons turn to rum, an antiphon is a prayer you throw in the middle of singing Psalms. The Spirit sings, the bottom drops out of my soul. And from the center of my cellar, love, louder than thunder, opens a heave of naked air. It's very hard to write about a mystical experience, folks. It's hard to put it into words. But there you have it. When was the last time the bottom fell out of your soul? And what can we do to have the bottom drop out of our soul more often? And notice the dynamic here. That divinity comes from below. This is very feminist. It comes from the cellar. We're carrying the divine within us all the time. It's in our cellar. The Spirit sings, the bottom drops out of my soul, and from the center of my cellar, love, louder than thunder, opens a heave of naked air. Air is another word for spirit. Now, we're going to be talking about the cosmic Christ, and Merton was very aware of the cosmic Christ. His love of nature, as he said, it comes from his Celtic roots. His family was Welsh in its origins. But let me just share with you a couple brief statements about his experience of the via positiva, of God in nature, because this leads right into the discussion that Javi and I will have about the stations of the cosmic Christ. Merton says, every plant that stands in the light of the sun is a saint and an outlaw. I think it's always good to have those phrases together, saint and outlaw. Every tree that brings forth blossoms without the command of man is powerful in the sight of God. Every star that man has not counted is a world of sanity and perfection. Every blade of grass is an angel singing in a shower of glory. Glory, the biblical word for glory is doxa. And whenever you see the word glory, you're talking about the cosmic Christ. It's about the radiance, luminosity, the glory of the divine that's found throughout nature. In his journal, he wrote, "Dance in the sun, you tepid idiot. Wake up and dance in the clarity of perfect contradiction. You fool, it is life that makes you dance. Have you forgotten?" So a wonderful thing about Merton is that he criticizes himself, and he criticizes his own institutions, including the church and his monastery and all the rest. He does not only criticize other institutions. And a final passage I'll share with you is it took him 6 years to convince his abbot to let him move out of the big monastery into a hermitage on the monastery property, to live a more simple life closer to the earth. And this is a passage where he writes about that experience. And this too leads right into our discussion of the cosmic Christ. He says, "I live in the woods out of necessity. I get out of bed in the middle of the night because it is imperative that I hear the silence of the night, alone, and with my face on the floor, say psalms, alone, in the silence of the night. The silence of the forest is my bride, and the sweet, dark warmth of the whole world is my love. And out of the heart of that dark warmth comes a secret that is heard only in silence. But it is the root of all the secrets that are whispered by all the lovers in their beds all over the world." What a powerful, beautiful passage. Notice how he marries the cosmic and the human psyche. He's being blessed by the night cosmos, by the moon, by the silence of the night. But he's also bringing in all the silences that are shared by lovers in their beds all over the world. This effort to heal the divide, the divorce, the rupture between the human psyche and the cosmos is at the heart of human survival today. And that is why these stations of the cosmic Christ are so important as a practice. We have to move out of our anthropocentrism, what Pope Francis has rightly called our narcissism as a species. And we have to move out fast. In this generation, we have to move out because there is not a lot of time to change our ways. Already climate change is completely upon us. The seas are rising, no matter how many politicians are in denial. The species are disappearing at untold rates. And it is because we humans have been in this narcissistic bubble for 400 years. And part of it definitely is religion's fault. I equate the divorce of science and religion to the year 1600. In that year, the church burned Giordano Bruno at the stake. Who was Giordano Bruno? He was a Dominican like I was. And he was interested, like I am, in bringing science and theology together. He was interested in bringing Copernicus into theology. After all, Aquinas, who was a Dominican in the 13th century, brought Aristotle into the faith. And so it was in our tradition to do this. But he got burned at the stake and tortured for doing it. And I think that was the moment, really, historically speaking, when we split. Science said to themselves, boy, these believers can be a little dangerous. So let's work out a truce. Why don't you believers take the soul and we'll take the cosmos? Oh, what a deal, said all the Augustinian thinking believers, because Augustine said nature is all fallen and it's different, it's not the same as grace. So that's what we did. And what happened is religion became more and more silly, introspective, and ridiculous. And science became more and more dangerous without a conscience. It went out and discovered the basic powers of the universe and all the rest. Now, of course, all this is shifting today because we have a new science and a new cosmology. And this is precisely the moment and the reason why the cosmic Christ, as an archetype, has to seize our minds and hearts again. As I pointed out in my sermon briefly this morning, this is also about ecumenism and interfaith, because in the East, the Buddhists have the Buddha nature. That is a cosmic Christ concept as well, that the Buddha is present in every being in the universe. That's what the cosmic Christ is about. The Christ is present in every being in the universe. It's the third nature of Christ. We know about historical Jesus, okay. We've heard about the Christ of the creeds, okay. But the third nature of Christ is the cosmic Christ. And who's heard about it? Teilhard de Chardin, the great scientist, Jesuit mystic, said, I can't find anyone, layperson or theologian, who wants to talk about the cosmic Christ. But the cosmic Christ is in the earliest sources of Christianity, in Paul and in the Gospel of Thomas. The earliest writings of Christianity, the cosmic Christ is there. So recovering the cosmic Christ is but not about New Age. It's about learning more the depth of our tradition. And there's a wonderful rabbi today who's written a very important book on the Kabbalah and the image of God. And the whole purpose of his book is to create a Jewish theology for ecology. And the one question he asks is the image of God that we Jews talk about found only in humans, or is it found in every creature in the universe? And the conclusion is every creature in the universe. And as I wrote him, when the book came out, this is exactly the cosmic Christ theology. So now we've got Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, also Hinduism, and the Sufi tradition too has an analogous teaching of the sacredness of all beings. So for an eco-movement, we need the cosmic Christ. The cosmic Christ is an eco-Christ. To put it concretely, if we're destroying rainforests, we are crucifying the Christ all over again, because Christ is the rainforest. Just like it says in Matthew 25, you do it to the least, you do it to me. If we are wiping out the species of polar bears and elephants and tigers, we are crucifying the Christ all over again in the name of today's empire, in contrast to the Roman Empire of the first century. So what Javier has contributed to here as an artist is to help us awaken a practice, create a practice. In the Stations of the Cross, which is about a 1,000-year-old practice, one walks this mini pilgrimage to 14 stations about the last 18 hours of Jesus' life. And but that's somewhat restrictive, needless to say. It's not about his teachings, it's just about those bad 18 hours. But the Cosmic Christ tradition is about the teachings and the stories that accompany Jesus' story and what he's teaching. So, for example, the Nativity. Why don't you go get the picture? Okay. The Nativity, if you check out the Christmas stories, they're filled with cosmology. You've got magi following a star. You've got angels. Whenever there are angels, you're talking about cosmology, because angels are busy in the cosmos, not just in our homes or crossing the street. No, they're here on the altar. You've got the four-legged ones at the manger. You've got doxa. The first words out of the mouth of the angels to the peasant shepherds is glory to God in the highest. So it's just filled with cosmology, the Nativity is. And that's just one of the, right here. That's just one of the, this is unrehearsed. And they're white. Yeah, there you go. Okay. So unfortunately, we weren't able to have a slide of this, but whatever, I'll hold it. Okay. And Javier can talk about this wonderful clay piece that he made. I hope you can see it somewhat.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you for support our work. And my mentor, Matthew Falk, which is amazing. Thanks to him, helping artists like me, we can share our creativity or ideas. This is the Black Madonna. This is Nativity, which is portrayed like a Black Madonna too. And here we have in the top of their head the umbilical cord, which is attached to the fetus. And that's the board of Jesus. That's what represents the Nativity. And I'm using different forms. One of those is curves, like a servant. And also I'm using other lines to represent the veins of the universe, board of Jesus, or Mary having Jesus. And then she is peaceful, she is happy to having in her womb her baby. And I'm using different types of colors and textures. And the head of the fetus is represented by like a rose also, or like that's his head. And also is attached to the umbilical cord. That's pretty much the piece.
And I see the fetus as an infinity sign too. So this is the cosmic Mary.
It's the cosmic Mary.
The mother of the universe.
The mother of the universe.
And you also mentioned all the curves now. The curves play a big role in your... Javier is indigenous, strongly indigenous, and that comes through, I think, in a lot of his work. But you mentioned that how much curves come through in your pictures of nature.
Yes. I always use curves because I think I'm more attached to the divine feminine. And curves to me are gentle, soft, and I don't know, inspire me, always been inspire me. And I prefer curves than square sculpture or figures.
Yeah. And you mentioned this is like a serpent here, actually.
This is like a serpent because I think a serpent is a mythology, a very strong mythology about it. And I think it's been demonized, and I think it's very ancient, and it's part of the creation.
Yeah. And it's
an ancient thing. It's
it's a
the
sign
our reptilian brain also is part of our reptilian brain and memo merging together.
Right. And the goddess, it's a sign of the goddess, the serpent
sign
too.
of the goddess too.
But that's important, the reptilian brain, you see, that this is an integration of the reptilian brain along with the mammal brain, the motherly brain, you see. So this is a marvelous marriage of the two, and this too is something that has to happen with us today. You know, Albert Einstein said that humanity needs a cosmic religion, that we must be done with ethnic religion and national religion. Of course, he's speaking out of the experience of the Holocaust too. But we need a cosmic religion with conscience, he says, grounded in conscience. And again, this is one more reason why the Stations of the Cosmic Christ, I think, are so timely. Because we have a new cosmology, and as I alluded to in the sermon this morning, just this week, we have this new news. Science itself has had its top of its head blown open, that it appears that there are 2 trillion galaxies in the universe, not 100 billion, which I always thought was a lot until this week. So, you know, the cosmos is just hitting us. You know, how many, you know, how asleep do we have to be? You know, we may be watching too much television, too many presidential debates to realize the real marvel of our time is that we are discovering our amazing place in this amazing universe of 13.8 billion years. And this is what the Cosmic Christ speaks to. And this, frankly, I'll put it bluntly, folks. And at 75, I've learned it's time to tell the truth. You know, I'm on my way out anyway. The churches are dying. The churches are dying and deserve to die because they're so psychologically oriented. They're so cut off from cosmology. They've lost the origin of praise and of awe and of wonder, which is the first stage of the mystical life, the via positiva. As Rabbi Heschel says, the awe is the beginning of wisdom. And cosmology is here to strike us with awe. And with awe then comes reverence and gratitude. And when you ground your life in that, when you ground the life of your culture in that, our politics, our economics, our education, our religion, our media, then is when a renaissance happens, when a rebirth happens. But until then, we're just on this downward spiral. And so we need the Cosmic Christ, and we need artists who can help us to develop our imaginations. And that's what Praying the Stations is about. You know, we just have half an hour to talk about this. But, of course, you can get the book that contains this and has meditations by myself and Bishop Mark Andrus, too, and the artists, Javier and also M.C. Richards. But the practice is just to go to each station and just be there and realize this is not about an art project. It's about a spiritual experience. How does each of these stories, each of these archetypes hit you at this time? And what is it asking of you? For example, the I am sayings. Now, M.C. Richards, when she was dying, it was about 10 years ago, she asked me what would I like. I said, I would love your I am tablets, because they hung at my university for 9 years. They hung at St. John Cathedral in New York for 2 or 3 years. And these tablets about the I am sayings are about the Cosmic Christ, because in the Cosmic Christ theology, Jesus did not use this language, I am the living light, or I am the bread, or I am the door. This language came after he died from the community. So they put these words into his mouth, which is another way of saying they are ours. How are you a door? Here's M.C. Richards' rendering of I am the door. It's a wonderfully, it's over here. It's over there, I think, on that side, if I'm not mistaken. It's a wonderfully simple, primitive, childlike rendering of a door. And this was the first of the I am clay tablets that she created. And then the other 6 tumbled out of her in a 48-hour period. So she did all 7 of them in one weekend. It was a spiritual breakthrough. But the question becomes, with all these I am tablets. How are you a door? How are we doors to one another? That's what it means to be another Christ. How are we bread to one another? How are we good shepherds? I am the good shepherd. I think that one's hanging right over there. And I'll talk a minute about that. Not too many of us are literal shepherds. But a shepherd is a steward. A shepherd has to protect the sheep. Sheep are very vulnerable. They can't run fast. They can't climb a tree. They don't have big claws. So they need support. And so I think the shepherd, being a good shepherd, is very appropriate at this time of ecological peril. We must be shepherds for the elephants, for the polar bears, for the rainforests, and all the rest. We have to care enough to be courageous and stand up for them like Sister Dorothy did in the Amazon. So these archetypes, they're about us. They're not about Jesus. And that's the challenge in the cosmic Christ theology. And I think that's why it's been muted for so many centuries. We hear about Jesus who saves. We hear about Christ who's the Son of God. We don't hear nearly enough about the cosmic Christ who is the presence of the divine in every creature, including all of us. And that includes, of course, our responsibility for compassion and for justice. Now, another one of Javier's clay tablets that I think is simply stunning, but all 9 of his are, is his version of the crucifixion. Now, if you check out the gospel renderings of the crucifixion, all 4 gospels, every one is set in a cosmic context. It's not about Jesus saving your soul on the cross. I'm sorry. It's a cosmic context. In one gospel, it says that the temple veil was rent in 2. Well, we now know that the veil on the temple at that time was a big painting of the universe. So that's the meaning, that when the Christ died, when Jesus died, the whole universe was rendered. And that's the Jewish teaching, that when there's injustice, all of earth is off-center. Now, Javier has this amazing rendition of the crucifixion. It's found over here. Now, I've seen a lot of crucifixions in my life, and never have I seen anything like this. This is not your right-angle Roman cross crucifixion here. This crucifixion, this cross is dancing. When I first saw it, I said to Javier, it looks like a starfish. And then I said, do you know the story of the starfish? He didn't know the story. That when a limb breaks off a starfish, the starfish grows it back. What a marvelous archetype for the cross and the resurrection. And you'll notice, you're probably too far away, but you can see it when you go up close. It's got it's a bird. There's a beak here. It's a great bird. And it's got the divine eye. And it's got the Trinity here, again in labyrinth and in spiral forms that are so dear to Javier. So do you want to speak to this too?
This is a crucifixion, but I want to do something less painful, more attached to the nature and to these times, and something original too. So I use like a starfish, like Matthew say, and also in the middle I put the eye of God, which is is an eye of not a human being, it's an eye of the deer. Because I want to merge, we all belong to the Creator, we all equal valuable. And I want to put the animals too that are important in part of life. They die, or the sea die, we die, So we have to put our mind in our nature, in our seeds, in our fields. And also I did a Holy Trinity representing by the 3 circles, wobbling, dancing, and I did the labyrinth, which means the infinite, and I used stone colors, dirty pastels, and a little bit of Art Nouveau influence, because Art Nouveau to me is very important because they put together the animals and the plants and merging with the humans, which is what we should do, and we care about it.
Thank you, Javier. These 3 particular versions are in fact available at a modest cost out at the table there. But I really want to encourage you people to pray these stations. They'll be here for 6 months, and to meditate on them, and then to carry them. This is a movement, I feel. We've got to wake up our narcissistic and anthropocentric species, and time's running out. And the young people, they get this. In fact, I would recommend at this church, every church I go to, I recommend, have children paint the 16 stations of the cosmic Christ. Have teenagers paint or make out of clay or wood the 16 stations, and have a young adult group make the 16 stations. You know, this is not something that Javier or MC Richards is doing for us. They just did it out of their inspiration and passion to move the rest of us. Let's get this thing going, you see, because in creating something like this, children, teenagers, or young adults, they will be involved not only in the co-creative process, but in learning the deeper mysteries of our faith, of our lineage. And these are mysteries of the cosmic Christ. The cosmic Christ is the archetype for mysticism, because it is these mysteries that trigger everything. So you'll see that we've touched on the baptism and crucifixion, transfiguration, of course, another great event of the cosmic Christ, the ascension, the resurrection, the Pentecost, Matthew 25. All these are examples of the cosmic Christ in our scripture, and they get ignored. These are the great feast days of the year. And we often forget that they're all set not in a context of just the human situation, but of our relationship to the universe, the sacred universe. So I know our time is short, and maybe we have time for 5 minutes question or so.
I need a volunteer to take a mic real fast. Is there somebody who can come up here and take a mic? You're wonderful. Thank you. And I think we have a question right over here. You'll take that to Rory?
You spoke about the new information about the universe having the trillions of galaxies. When are we going to start considering the possibility that everything is infinite? There are no limits to the number of galaxies. There is no limit to time. There was no Big Bang. It is simply the opposite and equal reaction to something else that happened before it. Everything is infinite in all directions.
Well, I think it's also important to recognize the mortality of things and the finiteness of things. So I guess it's a both and. But I don't know, for me, infinite is kind of a big word. And say everything is infinite, I'm not really sure what that means, to be honest. I think everything is radically beautiful, and beautiful beyond words. And maybe that's what you mean by infinite. And that everything is connected, everything is one. And that is the ancient teaching, both in Judaism and Islam, that God is the oneness of creation. The oneness of all things is God, and that's maybe another way of talking about the infiniteness of all beings. But I think that we also want to be grounded and know that we have decisions to make on a daily basis that are specific and have implications for other generations. And so we want to be, as Einstein said, yes, we want to be cosmic, but we also want to be grounded. And it's that both and that I think is important.
Okay, I'm going to have to put this on hold and invite those of you who are not at church at 9 to come at 11:15 and hear more of Matthew in the pulpit. But please join me. Oh, before you join me in thanking him, I think Javier maybe will be out at the table during this service for those of you who've already gone to church. Matthew has to go and get ready for church, but he'll be out there after the 11:15 to sign books. And there are lots of books for sale at the table out there. So please join me in thanking Javier and Matthew Fox. Thank you.